Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar presentation focused on how to build skills to reduce alcohol misuse among college students. My name is Jennifer Scherze. I will be your host for today's session. We have a really informative presentation put together for you today, and it will be led by three esteemed presenters, Nikita Khalid, Kim Weiland, and Dr. Glenn Albright. So at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Kim.
Thanks so much, Jen. Well, as you said, we have some really great presenters on today. So I'm actually going to turn it over to Nikita to give us a little bit about her.
Thanks, Kim. Hi, everybody. My name is Nikita Khalid. Thank you so much for attending today. We have a really nice presentation ready for you all. A little bit about me. My background is in educational psychology. I am currently enrolled in a doctoral program at the City University of New York Graduate Center, studying educational psychology, specifically with a concentration in learning development and instruction. I'm also a research scientist at Kognito, running efficacy studies on simulation programs, just like the one that we're going to showcase today. And some more educational background for me, I also have a master's in statistics, also from the Graduate Center. I'm going to pass it along to Glenn to introduce himself now.
Thank you, Nikita. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As you can see, I am with the Department of Psychology. I'm a clinical psychologist and professor of psychology at Baruch College, which is one of the senior colleges of the City University of New York. And I have the pleasure of teaching those large introduction to psychology classes, those classes probably that many of you have sat in, and really gives you an excellent exposure to the types of problems that students have and how simulations like you're going to learn about today can be very, very helpful for incoming students and students that have already been enrolled. I'm also teach the graduate class to our clinical students in trauma, grief, and recovery. And last, I'm co-founder and director of research at Kognito and work with Nikita in running efficacy studies that examine the impact of our simulations. Very, very nice to meet you virtually. Kim.
Thank you, Glenn. And a little bit about me. My background is in education and public health. I have actually had the privilege of being a teacher and being in the classroom before I went into public health and got my master's degree. I probably have one of the best jobs here at Kognito, I always say, because I get to work with all of our different teams, with the universities, with students, as we really look at which problems we can help solve and which programs to build, and throughout the whole process of building those. So I'm excited to get to talk about our alcohol and other drugs program today. So just quickly, I'll go through the agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about the why, both from the problem, but also why we decided to make this program and what we felt we could bring, what universities were hoping we could bring to the solution. We'll talk a little bit about our learning model, and then we'll give some background on the actual simulation around alcohol and other drugs and the different practice scenarios that students will get to take, and then I will demo one of those. And then, really exciting, we'll get to go over the study outcomes, the efficacy research, and then we'll have a recap at the end. And if you have any questions, as Jen said, please send those in or save those for the end, and we will cover those at that time. So just a little bit about Kognito. As Glenn said, he's one of the co-founders. Kognito has been going for over 20 years now. And really, it was built on this idea that we could create these learning experiences that were dynamic, that were practice-based, that used role-playing with virtual humans to really increase the skills and the self-efficacy to use those skills to create safer and more inclusive campus communities. I don't know if any of you have used any of our other programs around mental health, around sexual violence prevention, but we're excited to continue to add more and more programs to that library. So I put this slide here not because anyone on this program today doesn't already know this, but to really ground us in that students are going through a lot. This is not new that students are going through a lot. The transition to college has always been hard. This is a time where students are looking to explore, get out there and try new things, but while also needing to meet the expectations of the university, looking to belong. There's so much going on, and this has been increased of what students are going through over the last couple of years. We don't need to spend a lot of time digging into that today, but one of the things that I think is really important as we're talking about alcohol and other drugs, and as we talk about the motivations and what students are going through, that we remain grounded in knowing that there are a lot of underlying things going on. There's also the fact that we know that even though rates of alcohol and drinking are actually going down with some students, we still have a significant number of students who are binge drinking, who are using marijuana or other substances. So we really want to make sure that we are able to build programs that are going to address all these things and speak to all of the different types of students and their motivations and where they're coming from. So I want to talk a little bit about Kognito and our why and why we decided that it was important for us to create an alcohol and other drugs program. When we work with universities, we've been working with universities for years around mental health, distress, students who are at risk, suicidal ideation. And we've really focused in on the types of conversations that are happening on campus, those skills that students can use to navigate those different situations, to talk to a friend they're concerned about. And universities really came to us and said, these practice scenarios, this ability to practice these skills, this ability to learn how to have those conversations in a safe space before they need to go out and use those skills. There are so many other skills that we want to cover. Can you help us build some of those? And so that was really the impetus for us. Then when we get involved, we really want to dig in. We want to dig in with the students, with the subject matter experts, and we really want to do this idea of digging into what are the root causes? What are the motivations? Why are students choosing to drink? And then as we're really digging into those motivations, how can we help improve the skills that could improve judgment, could improve decision making? So we bring a lot of different experts, a lot of different things to the table. I'm going to talk a little bit about all of them today, but the ability to bring to the table all of those developmental theories, the evidence-based strategies in behavioral science, along with that root cause analysis in those motivations that drive our behavior, and then combining that with our internal teams that are experts in game design and how do you engage somebody in a dynamic learning experience. What does learning science have to teach us around reflective moments and being able to build skills based on actually trying out different things and being able to change how you're doing as you go through to reach a different outcome? And then really storytelling. We have some amazing storytellers internally who spend a lot of time talking to students and understanding those motivations and then building those scenarios to be really true to them, their motivators, their concerns, and what they are experiencing. One of the things that we tend to do in public health is talk about evidence-based strategies, which is great because we know they work. We know that they are going to really help drive protective factors, decrease negative outcomes, and so we embed all of these in our program. But what I think is so important is that when we're doing sort of that root cause analysis and we're digging into it with our storytellers, with our other people on our team who are going to help flesh out these scenarios, we're really getting to what are those motivators. So while we in public health tend to talk about social norming, if you're talking to a student, they're going to say things like, I want to fit in. Same thing with refusal skills, right? We want them to have the ability to refuse, to feel comfortable doing that, but they're also dealing with some of those thoughts and feelings like, I want to fit in. I want people to like me. Limit setting, they want to have fun. So what does that look like? What does fun look like to them? And how do we help them understand how they meet that motivator? And then some of these other ones, right, around resiliency skills and interpersonal skills. Resiliency skills, if you kind of dig into those motivators, right, they just don't want to feel bad anymore. So what are the skills to help them improve that? We also focus on things like positive decision-making skills, right? I don't want to get hurt. I want to be able to care about the people around me, and I don't want them to get hurt. How can I help do that with those bystander skills? Positive identity and this idea of goal setting. Really, they want to carve out who they are. This is a time they're exploring that. What does that mean authentically for them? Really making sure that agency is a big part of this. And the idea of goal setting, right? What are your goals? Who is it that you are and you want to achieve? And let's ground into that as we're thinking about this. But we also know that there is no one size fits all. It is not possible to build a program that is not practice-based that would fit everyone. What's so unique about what we do and why we're excited about it is that by creating dynamic learning, by giving them the opportunity to actually practice these programs by making the choices themselves in an actual scenario that might happen in real life, make choices about what they would say and see how that plays out, we're able to adjust based on those learner choices. And really, it's going to give them the ability to use those motivators and those concerns or those types of things that are going on with them to go through, and we'll give them opportunities to make choices, see how it plays out, and then reflect on that. This is a really big piece. When you think about learning and building self-efficacy, you need to have those critical thinking moments, those moments where they're like, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm going to see how it goes. That didn't go how I wanted it to. Okay, now I can reflect on that. I can undo. I can go back and try it again, or I can keep going, but I can try new strategies as I go. I always come back to this idea of critical thinking moments and reflection as we're building all of our programs. And I have been really blessed to be able to be my son's coach for travel soccer here for the last couple of years. And one of the great things that I have got to do as his coach, not only getting to interact with a whole bunch of hilariously funny preteen boys, but I also got to go to a coach's program here in Philadelphia. We have the Philadelphia Union, which is our Major League Soccer team, and they're so supportive of all of the travel soccer teams here in Philadelphia. And I got to go to a coach's program, and I was sitting there listening to some of these union coaches talk about one of the biggest mistakes that coaches make in teaching is that they spend way too much time on drills. And they said the number one thing you can do to help your kids get better at soccer, keep your drills short, right? If you teach a new skill, keep it short, and then put them into a game. Put them into a game and let them play, and let them try that out, and let them see how that goes in a real experience. And that's really how we think about learning here at Kognito. We also ground into this idea of nothing for us without us, which is why I talk about our storytellers and our SMEs. Our writers who write these practice scenarios spend so much time interviewing, doing actual scenarios with students and our SMEs, and how does this play out in your life? What does this sound like? What are you concerned about in this moment? What are the types of things that you might have said or you have heard other people say? And it makes them very realistic and really helps, again, speak to those motivators as opposed to just telling them what a skill is, but really letting them practice those skills in scenarios that feel unique to them. And so I come back to our why. One, obviously, is to engage people in their learning. It's not just to speak at them. It's really to engage them. We want them to have the ability to really go through these different choices, these critical thinking, these reflection moments. We want them to understand their own motivators so that we can equip them with the skills and confidence to really navigate all these different complex situations that they're going to come across. And ultimately, we want to build self-efficacy, their confidence to use these skills. When we're talking about skills, these are lifelong skills. These are transferable skills. When you talk about refusal skills, that can be used in all kinds of different scenarios. When you talk about goal setting, all of those. And so what we're looking at and what our goal is to not just teach skills as a didactic, but to give them moments so that we're building reflective adults, people who are able to look at a situation and say, okay, here's how I might handle this. Here's how I might have handled a situation differently. We want them to be empathetic peers, and we want them to be lifelong learners. So we want to begin to set the stage for them to continue to build on these skills throughout their college career. So I'm going to turn it over to Glenn to talk a little bit about the methodology of using virtual humans. It's so unique, and really it's a big part of what we do.
Thank you, Cam. And I just have to say that I love your soccer analogy. I nicely relate to that, and I sure wish you were my soccer coach back then, because it would have been very helpful. Equally, the use of virtual characters is an incredibly efficacious way to teach the type of evidence-based strategies that Kim was talking about. First of all, when you and I start having a conversation with a virtual character, we feel that it's safer to open up. We can be ourselves more easily. We can self-disclose, all resulting in increased learning. It reduces the cognitive load that one would experience in talking to a real person, freeing up more of working memory to really zoom in on the learning experiences. So it increases the engagement, the openness, and it decreases transference reactions. Now, transference reactions are the feelings that are induced in us if a character or a person we're talking to reminds us of another person, and that other person will elicit feelings and thoughts and will impact your ability to learn. So these virtual humans have a neutral enough appearance where they really control for transference reactions. And that's one of the reasons why in the data that we've published that the impact of the simulation, the efficacy studies that is shown to be equally effective on all races and ethnicities. And lastly, and perhaps even most importantly, is that it decreases social evaluative threat. So when you and I are in a role play with an instructor, with other people around watching, it generates anxiety in a lot of individuals. And again, that anxiety kind of increases the amount of things we're thinking about or the cognitive load, and it decreases our ability to learn. So when we're interacting or role playing with virtual humans, it decreases that anxiety. We're more likely to be ourselves. We're more likely to open up and integrate the learning as opposed to face-to-face real people. So a lot of unique advantages of virtual humans. Very, very excited about this.
So one of the things that we do in all of our post surveys is to ask a question, which is, now that you've taken the training, what is something that, or a situation that you might handle differently? We have hundreds of responses that are so powerful. But one of the things that I find so encouraging, and we'll do a demo of the scenario where you're actually able to talk to a friend you're concerned about, is that students want to be bystanders. They want to be proactive, and many of them are. What I find interesting is the students are like, oh, I would have handled that conversation differently. I would have been more considerate. I would have been more proactive about helping them think about support services that, or somebody they could go talk to. And even just moments where they felt like, if I had spoken up, we'll talk a little bit more about that, right? We don't want students to feel that it is on them to change their friend's behavior. And what I find so encouraging about this responses is that's not really what they're saying. They're saying, I wanted to have been that person who said something, and I wanted to have said it in a way that encouraged them to either seek help or make a different decision in that moment. And so that's what I find so encouraging. We're always trying to really help students improve those conversations that are already happening so they are able to be that friend that they want to be. So I'll go through this just really quickly because I won't get to show you or demo all of the practice scenarios for you today. But as I said, our goal is for every skill that we teach to very quickly after that get the students into a practice scenario where they get to actually play out that skill. So obviously in the introduction piece, we're going to cover things like what's the size of a drink, different alcohol types, all those types of things. So you have the basic knowledge and information you need. But then we're going to start talking about specific skills. So in choosing your limits, we're going to have students think about their own goals and set their own limits. Then they're going to be able to go out to a party, and they are going to be able to look at different ways to stick to those limits. This is one of those ones where there really isn't a wrong way to stick to your limits. What we're going to do is model out a whole bunch of different ways, different things you can say. And this is what we heard from students, is that many of them wanted to stick to their limits. They just weren't sure how to handle that moment. And so it was easier to sometimes just say yes. And so you can outright refuse, or you can deflect, or you can say, I'm going to switch to water, right? We're going to give you the chance to model out different ways of saying that and sticking to your limits without saying you can't drink at all, or this is right or wrong. And what students love about that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, is it just feels real to them, and it's about building what are those answers in your pocket, right, that you can pull out and use. Then in looking out for a friend, you're going to cover bystander skills. In recognizing a pattern, you're gonna actually get to talk to your friend Charlie, who you do have concerns about some of the decisions he was making the night before. Some of them were a little dangerous. His drinking has been pretty high. And then in the final one, we really embed back into this idea of your own goal setting and staying true to you, and really coming back to this idea of what are your motivators, what are your goals, and setting a plan for yourself. As I said, there is no one size fits all. So you do get to choose which path you want to take. There's Jules, who is essentially the non-drinker. Casey is the sort of middle of the road, doesn't really binge drink, but will have a drink now and then. And then Eve, who is much more of the, as it says here, go big or go home. Each of these is going to give you the same type of coaching, but it's going to speak to that learner a little bit differently, which is really important, right? Meet students where they are. I talked about choosing your limits. One of the fun things about this one is we actually do a couple of different scenarios. You can do as many of them as you want, or you can just do one at the party, and they all came from students, different ideas. You can go, one of them is pre-gaming, everybody does the pre-gaming. You can choose to not pre-game. If you do choose to pre-game, it is going to give you coaching like, hey, you've already had this much before you've even gotten to the party, and just kind of, that critical thinking piece. But you can play beer pong at the party. You can do the two truths and a lie. There's just a bunch of different ways, and it's a really fun way to kind of play out different refusal skills. Looking out for a friend is really this idea of bystanders, and what does it mean to safely intervene? We do cover delegate, direct, and distract. Again, many of these scenarios, responses came directly from students. One of my favorite ones that one student came up with and our writers put in for distract was about going to get tacos. Genius. Who doesn't want to go get tacos? So there's some really good stuff in there. If you guys want to demo any of these conversations, please let us know at the end, and we'll make sure that you get some access to be able to go through some of these. And then recognizing a pattern. As I said, this is one that students, especially in those open-ended questions, come back to a lot. They do have friends they are concerned about. They're just not sure how to have that conversation. And this is similar to if you've ever taken our mental health programs. This is going to really focus on what are the skills and the conversation skills to let a friend know that you're there for them and to help them open up and to potentially seek support services. So Glenn, I'd love to have you talk a little bit about some of the evidence-based communication strategies that are embedded in this.
Sure.
This is a big one for us.
One of the most profound strategies are drawn from motivational interviewing, which is shown to be an incredibly effective way of communicating with people and identifying intrinsic motivators that bring about changes in behavior. And they're really kind of easy things to remember. It's just that you have to practice them and remember to use them, if you will, such as asking open-ended questions like, what's going on? Or tell me about what's happening over there, as opposed to questions that can be answered just with a yes or a no. Or making affirmational statements like, hey, I'm really glad you're talking about this, or I really appreciate you coming up with this. And we know that when you make those positive affirmations, the individual you're talking to is going to feel understood, and they're going to be more likely to share with you more and more. And the same thing with reflective listening, where you're kind of like repeating back to the individual what they said to you by, it sounds like this, or so you feel like that. You're kind of like rephrasing or paraphrasing what they're saying so they feel understood, and you have a good connection with them, and you're increasing the empathic nature of your communication, which will actually make the conversation incredibly more effective. And lastly, just making summary statements like, overall, it sounds like this, and maybe we should do that, or just kind of summarizing it up. And these types of skills are not only important in navigating the types of conversations that you learn here, but in any conversation that you have, whether it's with a spouse or partner, or with a son or a daughter. They all have been shown incredibly effective. There's been dozens of meta-analytic studies showing effectiveness, and they're also cross-cultural. So very excited about these being embedded into the training.
I love that, Glenn. And one of the things that you mentioned is really this idea that these can be used in all different types of relationships. So one of the great things about this scenario is it was really teaching healthy relationship skills as well, and the didactic that follows this. So you're able to have this conversation, but you also are giving Charlie agency to make his decisions. So you're supporting him and encouraging him to seek support, but he has the decision to make. And we reinforce that in the didactic. It is not up to you to change somebody else's behavior. It's important to let them know you support them, to have these types of conversations. And that's so key at this age, really, as students are thinking about what does a healthy relationship look like. And so these skills that we do across different programs all build on those skill sets and those thinking about using these skills in different scenarios. As I said, we end with goal setting. Obviously, we've talked about goal setting throughout because we're talking about the students' why and their goals. So we want to end on that. They're able to set some personal motivators, set some intentions for healthy decisions, and think about what they're hoping to achieve, especially not just with their time at college, as far as their grades or those types of things, but more broadly, to think about some of the other pieces that they're hoping to achieve as well. So I'm going to switch over to do a demo, and we're going to do a very short demo of that last conversation that I talked about, which is apparently I cannot talk and switch at the same time, which is the one about supporting a friend. And we're going to be diving just directly in, so you won't be seeing the didactic before. We're going to dive directly into the practice scenario.
You're going to get a chance to practice having a conversation like this, playing as Emma. Kevin texted you the morning after the party to share that he's concerned about how much Charlie's been drinking lately. Since you've known him longer, you both decided it would be better for you to reach out to him. While you're talking to Charlie, make sure you let him know that you care, focusing on how you're feeling and asking questions. The goal here is to help Charlie just stop and think, and to give him the space to make his own decisions on what steps to take next. Good luck.
So you can see you get different options of things that you might want to choose.
How's everything going?
What do you mean?
Just like in general. School, life, whatever.
I mean, fine. I've been a little stressed with classes, but not like stress. I don't know. Some classes are going better than others. My computer science grades have been slipping.
So now you're going to get some feedback. And they said, that's a great question. You invited Charlie to share his thoughts.
You're going to fail if you keep drinking like this.
So what, you're a fortune teller now? It's not like, look, what else do you want to talk about?
So again, you're going to get some feedback here, making judgmental comments. Obviously, that's going to have Charlie shutting down. He's going to want to change topics. The other nice thing about the practice scenarios, and as I said, that was a very short piece of it. Usually a scenario takes about 5 minutes to go through, depending on how long it sort of takes to read the different options and make your choices. It can take a little bit longer. The nice thing about each of those is that you get to say what you would say. So that's why there are so many options, because we wanted you to feel like there's something in that choice that's realistic to something that you might say. Those judgmental comments might immediately be like, we might think, I would never say that. But those are things that students have all said, either they have said or they have heard somebody say. And so when we see results where students are like, I would have handled that differently, that is one of those things that's very powerful for them. So I'm going to turn it over to Nikita and Glenn to talk about the results of the efficacy studies.
Thanks, Kim. Okay, everybody, I'm going to run us through the results of the efficacy study that we did across a number of different institutions in the US. First, let's just go over a summary of findings, and then we can go into the more narrow details regarding what kinds of items we looked at, what the sample consisted of and what types of items and measures we were interested in measuring and the results. So for the summary of findings, one of the major findings that we had was that after taking the alcohol and other drug program, students indicated that they had a higher level of agreement with sets of items that stated it was important for them to set limits for their drinking, as well as stick to those limits, and that we found for themselves and for other students around them. In addition, we also found that there was a 7% increase in the number of students that indicated that they wanted to reduce their alcohol consumption immediately after taking the program, which is a wonderful finding because the intent of the student as well as their agency that they feel are going to be cumulative and come together in actual behavioral change that we can look at long term. Next slide, please. To continue on the summary of the findings, we have two large attitudinal constructs, which we'll go into a bit more in the slides following this one, but students were significantly more likely to identify warning signs of a potential higher risk incident, as well as to prevent an incident from happening or step in during an incident that they've noticed, in addition to more likely to recognize warning signs, speak with their friends about those concerns that they have because of the warning signs that they've noticed, as well as approach their friends and speak with them about potential support resources for them. We also ask the similar items across attitudinal constructs. So in addition to likelihood or behavioral intent, we looked at self-efficacy or ability in one's confidence. Students here were also statistically significantly higher in their confidence level to identify warning signs of a potential high risk incident, in addition to prevention, recognition of warning signs, and approach and referral conversations with their peers. Next slide, please. The design for the study, we usually follow this type of within group design for majority of our studies. What we do here is we take a pre-survey. The students or participants, whomever they may be, in this case, they were students in undergraduate institutions across the country, take the program, and then they also immediately after completion of the program will go ahead and be given a post-survey. And in those two surveys, we ask the same items. There are some variations depending on the study at hand, but what we do is we ask two sets of items at pre and post, and we can compare the same exact participants' responses before and after the training. And we do so using match sample t-tests. And we run statistical analyses, and it will produce for us whether or not taking a training like alcohol and other drug for students will result in significant changes in attitudes, sometimes in behaviors. And for this study specifically, we looked at primarily behavioral intent and self-efficacy. And actually, can we please go to the next slide? I think that's where, yes. So here's just a representation of the sample. Out of 862 students, we have a breakdown of race and ethnicity, as well as a breakdown of gender identity. Specific to the class that the students were in, we can see that 98% of them were indicating that they were freshmen, and their median age was about 18 years old, which is typical of students that are entering undergraduate institutions. We did so because this specific study was run with incoming freshmen in their orientation, in which they were given this program to take. And in addition, we also have 100% of those students that live on campus. That is because we wanted to ensure that while we were running this study, that these students were on campus, integrated into the campus community, and were able to give us genuine responses, as opposed to students that were perhaps learning remotely and not really in person with many of their peers there. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the one that I was looking for. So Kirkpatrick's levels of assessment. We briefly spoke about what kinds of items we looked at in this study. So here we can see there are 4 distinct levels in Kirkpatrick's model. We focus in this study on the first 2 levels. So level 1, measures of satisfaction or preliminary reactions of the program, will consist of things like recommendation rates, means efficacy items. How did they like the program? Was it good? Did it work? Are they likely to use information from the program? Those were asked at post-survey. Level 2 items are where the statistical tests come in. So level 2 items we looked at here will be the behavioral intent and the self-efficacy items. Sometimes we can look at things like skills or knowledge, but for the purposes of this study, we were really, really interested in attitudes, and that's specifically because in psychological research, attitudinal constructs predict behavioral changes, and that's really what we're looking for with trainings like this. Next slide, please. So for level 1 results, we had great level 1 satisfaction results. 97% of students taking the program rated the training very highly, from good, very good, or excellent. We also had results that about 85% indicated that the scenarios were relevant. 86% indicated that they would recommend the training to others, and 86% indicated that they were going to be likely to use information from the training. Next slide, please. And now we can get more into the attitudes. So here we're looking at behavioral intent, also known as likelihood. The sample of students were about 847 to 858. That number changes just based on the amount of students that are answering each of the items. Here we have 7 likelihood items, and the significance value was the highest level of significance, meaning that the changes that they indicated before and after taking the program actually happened because of taking this type of training. So for likelihood, we asked how likely were they to ask another person, such as the person hosting a party that they were at, to approach somebody that they were concerned about. How likely were they to identify warning signs of a potential high-risk incident? Are they able to prevent that incident from happening? And what was it that they were going to do? Were they going to distract? Were they going to speak up or call for help? And in addition, we also asked likelihood items regarding stepping in during a high-risk incident. How likely are they to recognize signs of substance misuse? How likely are they to speak with a friend about those concerns about substance misuse that they've been noticing? And lastly, how likely are they to talk with a friend about support services? And in the following slide, we'll see graphs of all of these items, pre to post. And the numbers on the y-axis are just indicative of the scales. So the scales that we use for these survey items were Likert scales from 1 to 5, and we rate them based on a strongly disagree to strongly agree scale, and in likelihood, we rate them on a very unlikely to very likely. So here we can see that their preliminary or their baseline results are within kind of that middle ground, middle area. They're not really so sure. They might be a bit likely to in the beginning, but not so much so that they're all the way on the right-hand side of the scale. And then after taking the training, we see significant high increases in all of the items for their behavioral intent. And then we'll see similar things in the following slides as well. So here we focus on self-efficacy, which is the strongest predictor of behavioral change. And self-efficacy, or ability and self-confidence, really gives students, or just people in general, agency. Agency is very important. If you feel that you are a live agent and you're active in the things that are going on around you in your environment and in your interactions with other people, you are going to be much more confident and much more likely to go ahead and do those behaviors. So here we looked at almost identical items, but just the constructs were different. How confident were they in their ability to identify warning signs, to prevent high-risk incidents, to step in during those incidents? And on the right-hand side, you'll see a graph here that shows self-efficacy or confidence in recognition and in approach and referral conversations. Self-efficacy, we also typically see a ceiling effect, which just means that people will rate their baseline or pre-survey items slightly higher. And even with those higher ratings at pre, we still see statistically significant increases post-training, which is great. Glenn, do you want to mention anything about self-efficacy as a construct here?
No, you just really nailed it. Well, yeah, I guess because it is really worth repeating, is that these attitudinal constructs have been demonstrated by major theories of motivation in psychology as to predict behavior change. And to see such high changes in both likelihood or behavioral intent and self-efficacy, especially with a baseline level that's already kind of high, and that a significant p less than 0.001 increase is really quite amazing and very promising that the program will change people's behaviors.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that you mentioned was sort of that feeling effect. What I find so interesting is, a lot of students are already rating themselves pretty high on some of these, like talk to someone about their concerns. What we know from the open-ended questions is they want to do that, they are doing that, and now they have a better way of doing that, a less judgmental way. One of the things that stands out on this slide specifically is they're much more likely to now talk about support options, which is huge. That's the gain we want to see, right? And then on the earlier slide, one of the ones that we showed a big increase in likelihood is that students didn't rate themselves very high on, if they're at a party, maybe talking to somebody who might be better friends with that person or who is running the party. That's something we very specifically showed in our bystander conversation, where they were actually able to go and bring somebody else into that conversation as a bystander as well. And there was a really big increase in just their likelihood to even do that, right? So as we're looking at all of these increases, I think it's so interesting in the ones that we see this sort of, oh, I hadn't thought of that, or, oh, I can maybe do this a little better now, as an extra layer on top of what's already some pretty significant outcomes.
Thanks, Kim. That's a great point. The training itself also talks a lot about self-reflection, and that's really indicated in this user feedback, some of these snippets that we pulled as well. Some of the qualitative data that we found, we asked students questions like, now that you've completed the training or you've completed the program, are there any things that you can reflect on or situations that you can think about that you would have used some of the skills that you know now after taking the alcohol and other drug program? And a couple of students indicated situations like in their sophomore year, one of their friends they noticed was drinking pretty frequently, and let's say they should have said something rather than just not saying anything at all and letting it go by. Or somebody else indicated that once they had a situation where a friend of theirs drank a bit too much and they didn't really talk about that with them at all, and they noticed patterns, but they just didn't know how to go about bringing them up. So now that they've taken this program, they know a conversation tactic that they can employ to have that conversation. And then lastly, somebody also indicated, I would have talked to my brother much earlier about things that they'd noticed. So the training is helping them to reflect not only about situations in their past, but also potentially to reflect about things that they're going to do in the future.
Thank you so much, Nikita and Glenn. This is really exciting research outcomes, and excited to present them today. Jen, I'm going to turn it back over to you to close us out and see if we have any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I want to extend a really big thank you to Dr. Glenn Albright, to Nikita and Kim for that in-depth presentation, coverage of the alcohol and other drug product, as well as the efficacy data. If you're interested in seeing or reading a little bit more of research, we have an extensive library that can be found on our website, and you can visit kognito.com/research articles. And if you are looking for more of a product demonstration and want to find out a little bit more about how the product demo that you see, how that works, how you might be able to integrate it at your school or institution, we do invite you to fill out a contact form, and you can find that on our website at kognito.com/contact. And anyone who has attended or registered for the webinar, and even if they weren't able to make it, you will receive a follow-up from us with links to these, as well as a link to view the presentation. And lastly, if you are interested in connecting with any of our presenters, they have graciously put their contact information on this slide if anything else comes up post-webinar. And also just want to let anyone know, if you do have any questions about anything that we've discussed today here, any of the research, any of the learning model, please feel free to ask us a question. We don't have anything right now, but I want to just turn it over to the presenters. Is there anything else that you might want to close us out with today?
Sure. If we don't have any questions, one of the things I will just sort of encourage, as Jen said, if you're interested in really understanding more about those practice scenarios, as I said, this product actually has 4 different practice scenarios, which is quite a few. To really understand them, it's great to just get in and go through all of the different paths that you can choose. You know, what does it look like if you go through one way? We always encourage even our students who are taking it, you know, try different things, right? This is your opportunity to really practice and build those skills and see how things will play out in real life. And I love how one of our subject matter experts put it is you can try out a whole bunch of things without doing any harm. You're in this really safe space. What if I try saying this? Or what if I try, you know, this refusal skill? So it's one of the very unique things about this program. And because we were only able to do a very short demo today, I encourage you to get with the team, get the larger demo and really get in there and try some of those out.
And I would just like to say thank you for attending and caring about our students. And, you know, our students today are under more stress than ever. I mean, they're coming into colleges with real problems in terms of how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected them, their learning styles. I notice in my introduction to psychology classes, they kind of have to make up for a lot of the learning skills they lost in like say high school, because they had to go to an online learning curriculum that didn't meet SEL standards, if you will. And so, you know, there's a lot of stress they're experiencing that's added on to continuing pandemic effects, and also what's going on with the world, and turning to alcohol as a self-soothing behavior is really very concerning. And to be able to stop it or control it or get people to become more aware of the consequences earlier in their lives, the better off they will be. And one last thing too, that we as faculty are impacted by this too. Our students' stress levels impact us, and the more tools we have to be able to help them, we're also helping ourselves, and we're helping fellow students in the classroom. So thank you very much for attending.
Thank you, Glenn. That was very well said. And Kim, thank you for the additional context around what someone will see if they reach out to us for a product demo. Well, that concludes our presentation today. Thank you everyone for attending, and you will receive a follow-up email with some of these links. Thanks again. Have a great day, everyone.